Okay, so this is what, and I think the main thing is really just understanding just like the process as always with coding. So you can see what I have is, I'm looping through the data and then I'm having the SQL here, okay? And then I'm putting this end my for loop. So let's just, what I like to do, we could preview the code. We're probably going to get an error. Yeah, so we get this error. What I like to do before kind of previewing it is compile the code. So this will show us what SQL this translates to. All right, so this is what we can see, right? We see select 0 as number, select 1 as number, select 2 as number, and then we're sticking this union all statement between each of the selects. So this is ideally supposed to like stack these select statements together. That's the idea. And then just to go through the Jinja part, there's just two things to note, I think. The squiggly bracket percentage is where we don't want to print the output, right? We want to perform Python, right? We want to have a loop, but we're not actually trying to print any output of this, right? It's just a logical statement. Here, the double bracket, this is where we're trying to display or some SQL as a result of this. So you can see that in the compile again, right? There's nothing in the for statements, like no output there. But with the square bracket I, right, you can see that an output is actually displayed. Okay, cool. So, the other thing is, just like a little bit more verbose because there is no white space here. So we both have to do the for loop and then the end for. Okay. What's the problem here? I think the problem is that we don't want this ending statement right here. And Jinja, at least in DBT, gives us a helper with this, which we can say if not loop dot last. And I'll talk about this in a second. And if. So basically what we're saying is, okay, stick this union all in here for every iteration except for the last one. Okay? When it's the loop.last, so if it's not loop.last, union all, right? Union all, union all. But once we get this loop.last, don't union all here. And this is going to be pretty, like this, there's a reason why I cover this. We're going to have to use it. So now let's see if that works. I broke it. Expected unknown tag. Is it not end for? Oh, it's probably end if. Oh, I do have this end if. For. Let me save this. It might just be that. Yeah, so that was it. I just, annoyingly, right, there's no autosave. So I just forgot to save it. And now it seems to be compiling fine. So select 0 as number, union all. Select 1 as number, union all. Select 2 as number, right? This last one, we don't need a union all. Let's see if this works. Right, and this actually worked. So you have the 0, 1, and 2. Okay. Any questions about this part so far? Right, so the big takeaways is just square bracket percentage for when you don't want to display the output, and then the double square brackets, right, when you do. And then it's just, there's no white space, so we have to close each of our blocks. All right, the next thing, if we want to use variables, which we will, we can do like set, let's say the colors equal to, red, green, blue. And then we'll just loop through the colors. And let's just see what this produces. Okay. So we have this, and this is pretty good. This is actually going to break for us. So you can see we don't want to display the output, so we're doing the percentage the percentage squiggly bracket. And here we are displaying it, right? So double squiggly. If I do a preview, I think this is going to break, and I'll just explain why. Okay. So what we're getting is this SQL compilation error, invalid identifier red. what it's complaining about, if you look at the compiled code, and again, like always just go back to the compiled code to debug, it's thinking that this is like a column, right? But really we want this to be a string, okay? Like we want this, in order to display this, right, to have red, green, blue stacked up, right? We want to display this. We want this to be a string. So it thinks this is a column because there's no quotation marks around this. So what we'll do is we'll just put quotation marks around this, and then we'll compile it, and now you can see this select red, green, blue, and now this will work, I hope. Okay, so that works fine now. So it's just something, I just wanted to show you that error as something to debug. So again, just always go to the compiling when you run into an error. Take a look at it, see if you can figure it out from there. Questions about this, and then I'll show an example of how to integrate this, refactor our code with this. But okay, cool. So what we saw was the logical. We have to close the blocks, set to declare variables, and then we can use our variables here. All right, this is, I'll try my best. If this doesn't work, the reading will explain it, but I don't want to get too bogged down in this. So here's what we want to do. Essentially, like, when you have the integration code, and like I said, this is generally the meat of your DBT project, is combining the data, deduping the data, right? And the most verbose statement is this one, where we're selecting the fields from each of the tables. Generally it's like the same fields, so you can see the first name, last name, phone, right? Here it's first name, last name, phone again. Okay, and you can imagine here we just have two sources, but typically you might have like 15 different sources that are combining. And rewriting, as we know, just duplicating our code leads to errors as well as just time. So how do we use Jinja for this? So the first thing is basically we won't really need this initial declaration, because remember, these are our import CTEs, and instead what we'll do is we'll use square bracket percentage set, and we'll call these our sources. Okay, and I just want to make sure I'm not using a keyword, so that I think that's fine. Set sources, and then we'll have stage HubSpot contacts. This will be a string, and then stage RDS customers. That will be a string. Okay, and now what we'll do is we'll go about constructing the merge contact statement. And then I should say, typically what I'll do to actually is like copy and make sure I have this code somewhere, and then because what we're trying to do is really construct the SQL. So let me comment it out, or at least place it somewhere else. Okay, so this is what we're trying to construct, is this SQL. And what we can do, right, we have this with merge contacts as, and we want to build this select statement, and we'll do these ones first. First name, last name, phone from HubSpot contacts. So with merge contacts as first name, and we want to say select first name, last name, phone from, and this will be really my stage HubSpot contacts, the ref, right? If this was, remember, this is referring to that staging model, and so if I was just going to kind of select all from merge contacts at the end, you can see what, right now I'm not really using any Jinja. Did I not save? Sorry, it's probably just that it's compiling the selection. Okay, so with merge contacts as this thing, what we'll do now is let's do a with merge contacts as, and we'll say percentage for source, and I'm not using, notice I'm not using the SURCE, that's because that's a keyword in DBT, right? So for source in my sources, then I want to end the for loop, okay? And we want to select this stuff, except what should this be? This should be my source, right? So that way I'll say, for each source in here, select at least these columns from ref source. And then let's do compile. And, oopsies, I made a mistake. This should be what? 2 brackets. Why? Because I want an output here. Now let's do compile again. Okay, so this worked, right? With merge contacts as select first name, last name, phone from, notice that we're passing through the source into the ref function, and then the ref function is translating that into the schema, okay? And then we have the next one, select first name, last name, phone from stage RDS customers. So this is good, right? We know what we want to do is put a union all here, and then we want to say only do this if not loop dot last, right? And then do that here. End the if statement. And then again, I'm always checking my work. Let's compile this. So we have this with merge contacts as. Here we have the union all, and notice we don't have it after here because of the if statement. So that's good. The next tricky thing is the IDs. Okay. So what's tricky about this is, in both cases, we want the HubSpot contact ID and the RDS contact ID. All right, but you're only doing, you want null here unless, when this source is HubSpot, you want it to be HubSpot, but when it's not, in all other cases, you want it to be null, right? So, or I guess I said that a little off. When this source is RDS, right, you want it to be select like RDS, for example, and that's what you see down here. Select customer ID as RDS contact ID, but in all other cases, you want it to be null, okay? So what we'll do is we'll do something like this. We'll say, all right, select customer ID as RDS contact ID, and we'll say really what we want is select percentage customer ID if source is in is in RDS, else null. Something like that. And I might just be able to put out pure null. I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. So what this should do, we'll just see it. And if not, I broke it. Unknown tag, customer ID, Ginger was looking for the following, N4 else. I think what happened is I need this to be a string because it's like raw. Sorry, I'm going to look at my answer.
Oh, the and if, right? You need the
No, because it's a one-line statement. So I can do select company ID. Oh, it might also just be that I don't have this. Did this compile? If source. Oh, it should be if. Oh, this shouldn't make a difference. If RDS in source. Otherwise, null. And I want to make sure. Oh, you know what I'm breaking on? This actually should be displayed. This is the error, I think. Sorry about that, gang. This confused me. So I had the percentage here, but actually, apparently this should be the 2 squiggly brackets because we're displaying the output. Let's compile this. Okay. So here I want to say else null. You see this isn't actually outputting. That's because I need a string, quotation marks around here. And now I think this will be okay. Okay, so here we got this working. Select null as RDS contact ID. We need a comma here, right? Comma, first name, last name, phone from this should be, null, right? So this is proper, right? Because in this case, it's HubSpot. And so we don't want to display, there is no HubSpot contact ID, there is no RDS contact ID when we're with HubSpot. And then in this case, when we are in RDS, we do want, right, we are setting the customer ID equal to RDS contact ID. Okay? So this is working correctly. And let's just show you that one more time. So it's select, and notice I have to put quotation marks around each of these. Select, display the customer ID if we're on the RDS iteration, right? And if we're not, we want null, because when we're on HubSpot, there actually is no RDS contact ID. And then we basically do the same thing, but this time for HubSpot. So for HubSpot, I forget if it was called contact. Let's just see. Contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. So select contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. All right. If what? If we're on the HubSpot source. If HubSpot is in the source. Otherwise, null. Okay? And let's compile this. All right, and then let's take a look. So with merge contacts as, select null as RDS contact ID. This should be null when we're on HubSpot, right? Because there is no HubSpot contact ID. And then comma, contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. That's correct, because right now we're on HubSpot. Then when we move first name, last name, phone, that looks good. Union all also looks good. Then when we go to the next one, this customers, the RDS one, here, customer ID as RDS customer ID, but there is nothing for HubSpot contact ID, so that's always null. Okay? And then I guess let's try to preview it. Right, so this is previewing, right? This is correct. What we'll need to do, the rest, right, where we have nulls in the beginning and then later on, my guess is we'll get a bunch of the HubSpot ones. So that's good. What we have to do from there, my only is copy over the rest of it. This part, there isn't really much, any Jinja to use, okay? Because we're combining it. If you look at this statement, we're basically just going column by column, right? And taking the max of each of these. First name, last name, max of the phone, max of HubSpot company, right? Just the max of everything, okay? And then doing a group by. So it's really only in this middle part that you're using the Jinja, okay? And that's really it, all right? That's like the main thing I wanted to cover is using the Jinja with this middle layer. So questions about this, right? There's really two, I guess there's, we saw the union all except when we're on the last iteration. So that was one thing. We saw that we are, right, setting our sources up top and that we're iterating through them, right? And that what I did was I first just went through the common columns, right? The columns that are always the same from the ref source. And then what I did was take care of this if else component where basically we only want to use the customer ID if we're on the correct source, but in every other case we want it to be null. Okay, so when we're on RDS, then we're good. So when RDS is in it, select, set it as the RDS contact ID, and then here, when we're on HubSpot, blah blah. And then down here, we just combine the data. I don't know if this will work or not. We'll see. I broke it, but one, I have two commas here. So at the very, this might be too tricky for me to debug for right now. But okay, so and then at towards this last section, this will effectively stay the same. Okay, and that's really it. Like that's the main part of the refactoring. Okay. Questions about this or any comments about this?
So, if you had like more sources, like 10 or 15 sources, would you still handle line 6 and 7 the same way, or would you just create like another loop to check?
This will look, you will handle it the same way, and this will look the same, right? Because if you have, you know, more sources here, let's,
I guess what I'm asking is you would still have to manually put a line for each of those.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
that's right. You have to put a line for each of them, but each individual line will basically look the same. Show, you know, do the select statement if we're on the source. Otherwise, this is always going to be null.
I'm just kind of curious why the first name and last name and phone don't get duplicated because it's going through the for loop each time.
Well, let's look at the compilation. Remember the way that this is structured is we have these various sources. Let's say these are, you know, we're on these contacts. HubSpot has a first name and last name, right? That source does. And so does RDS, right? So what we're doing is we're selecting, right, the first name and last name from HubSpot, and we're selecting the first name and last name from the RDS source. And then what we'll do later on, right, if we continued this, was basically we'll group by, right, we'll dedupe them in this component, right, where we say, okay, yeah, we do have the same Bob Smith from HubSpot and RDS. Let's group by first name, last name to combine those records, and then, you know, select an attribute from each one, right? From the HubSpot source, I'll pull out that, and it'll be null in all other cases. For the RDS contact, right, I'll pull out that from RDS, and it'll be null in all other cases, right? And then take the first name, last name, right? Cool. Other questions?
You're not creating any primary key, right, in this whole
No,
situation?
in the reading, it does have you do that. So, like, you know, if you, I forget if I have it here. So, for instance, we can talk about, well, what I do is at this stage, you should create a primary key. And this is just an identifier that is not, you know, RDS or HubSpot or, you know, have the source information. But what we're doing is we're using this dbt utils. You have to pass through something that's unique here, right? Because effectively you're hashing this, right? You're putting this through a formula, and as long as this is unique, then the key will be unique. And you can see that this creates, right, a primary key. And we're using this dbt utils package to do this. And I talk about in the reading how to install it, but basically what you need to do is go to packages.yaml, and in packages.yaml, you'll create this file. This will be in your root directory. Create packages.yaml, and then just, I forget, there's a more recent version by now, but this is one I used. And then I think it's called, I forget if it's dbt, I forget what it is, dbt seed or something like that. dbt something. So you'll put that, you'll have to, it's like installing a pip package, where you'll put in dbt something, I forget what, to install this package. All right, and then once you do that, you'll have access to dbt utils. dbt utils, I think I might have mentioned this, utils has a lot of nice kind of functions to look through. You know, so this is a nice, really nice package to have, and I think there is a lesson that takes you through some of the more popular ones, like this star, for example. Right, allows you to star all except certain columns, which comes in handy.
So Jeff, yeah, could you go back to the code?
Sure.
The there's a percent if and if that one can it be written in inline if as well?
This one, if not loop.last, maybe, yeah, if not loop.last, then just have the union all. Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I would just have to experiment with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, yeah, just follow like a Ken's kind of idea. Like if we have multiple like company
Oh, I
ID,
see. Now I kind of pick up the idea. Can I do a loop here too? Is that, Ken, your question? The only issue, I'd say the only issue is you have to, which I think you probably, a good code base would, is to make sure that these column names are consistent, right? In my code base, they're not, but we could have, made sure they were each time, right? Like we could have made sure, like, hey, this is always contact ID, right? And I could have done that in staging to make them consistent. So I think maybe, yeah, you could do it that way. Um, I'm trying to think how I might do it. Like if I would, because ideally you would maybe break this into a function. The other thing you might do is you can write a macro. A macro is basically like a function that you get to use throughout your code base, and maybe you would like use a macro that will, and maybe there might even be a macro already written in dbt utils that allows you to kind of easily loop through and do this if else statement. I'm not sure, but that's probably more what I would do, because you know me, I don't love nested loops, right? That's the downside. So I was just wondering, maybe I'd bring this out and set it to a variable or something if you can, and then insert it in here, right? Because it's just very hard to debug nested loops. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I have like a general like a data modeling question. So, for example, if we have multiple company ID, like isn't that like it's a one-to-many relationship, right? So we can just put in a like a separate table. I mean, in like creating person ID and then create another one-to-many table, like just a person ID with a company ID. It's a separate table, and another is like so instead of
You'd have a
like
join,
creating
basically. You're saying if a customer has many companies, right, then you would need a joint. You'd have a many to many table,
right,
right? Is that what you're saying?
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would do that. And that would really depend on, if you're using the star schema or the snowflake scheme. Basically like your company's preference. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Any other questions about this? No? Okay, good. All right. So, like I said, power through this. This is totally, useful. Um, and we'll move on. Like, we have, there's a good amount of material on it to practice and go through, including even setting up connecting this to a dashboard. But, we'll move on to other material probably after today. Maybe we'll put like an hour into this on Tuesday, and then, but that's about it. All right, so I'll deploy this component. Let me deploy all these. The other thing that is covered here is DBT tests. I won't lecture on this because I think you can get it, but you can imagine, the whole purpose. I just want to explain the how important this is. If the whole purpose of our like DBT code base is to perform analytics on it, ensuring like the quality of your data, that it's not missing data, that this data is representative of the real world, that you're going to be drawing conclusions on. You can imagine that's very valuable, right? We can be just having our navigation pointing in exactly the wrong direction without tests. Okay, so totally worth thinking about, not only, the implementation part, that's one thing, but thinking critically about your data and like whether it matches the real world. We'll talk about more about that in the data analytics portion, but it does come up here, obviously. So let me stop recording and